From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Good gracious, that was a long winter, and it's over. Spring is here, and it's time to get some plants. And if you're like me, there's so many plants, you don't know where to get started. This episode is for you. This episode is also for you if you know exactly the plants you want, because we've got somebody on the episode who knows some of the craziest nooks and crannies of the plant world. Fred Weisensee from Dancing Oaks Nursery. If you're in Western Oregon, you know about Dancing Oaks up in Monmouth. They have some of the kind of crazy, interesting plants for pollinators, hard to get plants. But Fred's going to cover it. I think this episode's great for people probably right across the Western U.S. There's some great plants that can grow in a lot of different climates that we're going to be talking about. And you're going to hear me kind of scribbling down, trying to catch up because I don't know all these plants. So yeah, you may not need to. I'm really glad we captured this in an episode. There's going to be a transcript. There's going to be show notes. So without further ado, let's go up the 99 to Monmouth with the unrepentant plant addict, Fred Weisensee from Dancing Oaks Nursery, this week on Pollination. Welcome to Pollination.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, I've heard that people around the state have just doubled down during the pandemic in their gardens. Has this been something that you've seen at Dancing Oak? Has there been a surge of interest in gardening over 2020?
Definitely, that's true. I would say that last year was our busiest year overall with the nursery. But, part of it also was related to being a mail order nursery as well. But I've heard that at first, for a while, because of restrictions, the garden center type nurseries were having some trouble, struggling, but that changed as restrictions came down. And so I think pretty much most nurseries in the end did pretty well. But we did, because of being both retail where people can come, with social restrictions, and mail order just exploded.
Well, I'm glad for that. I imagine it was a nervous time, the pandemic really ramping up just during gardening season and how that was going to pan out. I'm really glad that things worked out for you. I think maybe just to begin with, everybody in the Mid-Valley knows about Dancing Oaks. We had Al Shea on previously, and he was talking, how wonderful it is to have the nursery. Tell us a little bit about how the nursery got started and what's your vision or what has been the vision for Dancing Oaks?
Well, the vision evolves over time. It's a journey because probably it's a good thing you don't know what you're getting into. Maybe you would have not started at the beginning, but it's been a great journey. We were living up in the Oregon City area, and I'm a physician, so I was practicing up there, and we had thought about at some point moving down to this area where I grew up. So I grew up, part of my growing up was on this very farm that we're living, and Leonard grew up across the valley. So, we come from rural areas. We enjoyed living up there, but at some point we thought we would move down. And when I started looking into jobs just for the future, there were jobs immediately available for me. So we had to make a decision if we came down here. And that really started because now we were living on a lot of land. Leonard was working at a nursery. Mm-hmm. And now that we were living on more land, we just started down that road of establishing a nursery. And as we went along, we were inspired by other nurseries like Northwest Garden Nursery. I don't know if you've heard of them. They've changed a lot, but they're down in the Eugene area. Or at the time, I think that there was also, Sistus was starting. And nurseries like that where they would have a garden and then also be selling plants. That inspired us. We were very interested in having a garden, and we thought that we really enjoyed nurseries that had a garden where people could see things growing. Plus, we would get the experience of growing them, and it has been very helpful in knowing what to tell our clients, what to tell the customers.
Oh, absolutely. I can just imagine, and also just the experience of coming to a place where you can see the plants all in place and in a design.
Yes. So that when we love gardens. And so having, what I tell many of our customers coming is, they ask a similar question. It's sort of like, you could be analogous to heroin addicts owning a pharmacy. And so, and so we are completely undisciplined plant collectors. We have had various phases of collecting various genuses of plants. But really, we haven't found too many plants we don't like. Leonard, of course, now is getting a little more concerned. He's having to, prune up a lot of these climbing roses that have gotten onto things. And so he's not so enthusiastic about some of those. But as long as they don't hurt too much, we pretty much, so we have plants, everything from bulbs, perennials, shrubs, trees, periodically some annuals, but really mostly perennial type plants, everything from bulbs to trees. At the garden.
Now, when people think, when I talk to somebody and they think about pollinator gardening, they think about a lot of plants that aren't native to Oregon. I think about like just walking around the neighborhood here, I can see all the lavender, oregano, but dancing oaks is the place, Al, for example, will go when he's looking for unusual plants, particularly native plants. Why are some of these unusual plants? Why did you take this direction in your business? Why? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there has, as far as our customers go, also, they are quite interested in native plants. And we are also very interested in native plants, not just native plants, but we are very interested in native plants. And especially, there are selections also of native plants that can maybe have a little more interest for the garden, can give some different characteristics that might be more appropriate for a garden, for instance. But because they're adapted to our climate, and because there are many pollinators, like we're talking about, that may depend on them, we decided that should be part of what we do is offer native plants and perhaps some native plants that many people don't have access to and you can't get at many garden centers.
Well, fantastic. Well, the key thing I did want to do in this show is I know there's such intense interest in pollinators and gardening this coming up this summer, and also that people are aware that there's some really beautiful plants that you can incorporate that are pollinator plants. I thought we'd go through the seasons and sort of pick out some of the plants that you're excited about. And I was thinking about maybe starting right now, late winter, early spring. What are I imagine now we're dealing mostly with blooming shrubs and trees. Do you have some plants that you kind of really love or recommend for pollinators?
This time of year, yes, you do need. I mean, it's great. We never have to put out any hummingbird feeders, and we have hummingbirds here all season long. And since we do, it's very important to us to have plants that bloom through this period of time, which can be more challenging. There aren't as many plants that bloom through the winter. So we have a wide variety of both ribes and which are the currants or gooseberries, and also manzanitas, the Arctostaphylos. So among the ribes, we also have incorporated some more southern. When I say southern, I mean like California or Southern Oregon varieties, because they will tend to bloom earlier here. For instance, we have ribes malvaceum that's blooming now and has been blooming for the last few weeks. And so the hummingbirds or bees both can utilize that plant. And then following that will be the sanguinium, which is a more common ribes for our area. Or labii, which is a little harder to grow. It's one of the native gooseberries, but has this beautiful fuchsia-like flowers that dangle from the stems, and also orange-colored thorns, which even before it leaves out, it can be quite striking. But it needs very good drainage. It's kind of fussy. It doesn't like a lot of disturbance. So some natives can be a little challenging. They're not always, just because they're from here doesn't mean that they're going to be necessarily easier to grow. And then the manzanitas, we also borrow many from both Southern Oregon and California because they can do quite well here. And some of the there's one called Siskiyou Pink, for instance, that is blooming now, but others are starting to bloom as well. Some of the densiflora, sometimes they'll bloom a little earlier. So the manzanitas are definitely something that the hummingbirds and also bees will go for. And then there are also some mahonias, which there's a native mahonia which tend to bloom a little later. But through in the wintertime, there's some Asian crosses, Mahonia media crosses, and one of them is Menziesii, Arthur Menzies, I'm sorry. And there's another variety called Charity, Winter Sun, I think, is another variety. There are several of those. They can get quite a bit taller. We'll talk about, I know one of the other questions is some that go from maybe, fall to winter, and there's some that might do that as well. Actually, Charity is a good example. When we get there, that'd be a good one.
Well, and we're recording this the first week of February, and I've seen manzanitas and those hybrid mahonias blooming right now. So they're fantastic. Are any of these plants difficult? I often think that I don't know if this is true, but manzanitas being some of the trickier ones. You said that the not the currant, but the gooseberry was a little bit difficult.
I would say the manzanitas, the problem often is that people overwater them in the summer. So they're used to going through drought. And so if they get watered too much, not allowed to dry out in the summer. So if they're near a lawn that's getting constant water, they will be subject to root rot. So you want to put them in an area where they get minimal. If they're going to get water, it's only intermittent in the summer. In the winter, they're adapted to getting wet. They just don't want to be in what I would call soggy soil. So if you have to, you can elevate them some. That will help.
Okay.
And they don't want a lot of, I wouldn't say they would want a lot of digging around them or things like that. That could introduce disease. So you can mulch, but I wouldn't be digging too much around them, I don't think.
Okay. Any of these plants suitable for some of our folks who live in condos or anything? Any container gardening possible with these plants?
The manzanitas, they possibly. I think that you might have a hard time moving them from one size to the next is the only thing. But we do that. They do want to get bigger, so it's a possibility. I know some people have taken them for bonsai. I'm not sure how they've done with them. we have not done that. But I know people have taken them to do that, and so it would be interesting to see online. You probably could find out if people have had luck with that. I hate to say that. The ribes, they could be tricky. We have trouble from season to season in pots with them. So I would say that for this time of year, those kind of things are going to be a challenge. One thing that might work are some of the small, but I don't know if they'd be blooming this early, or some of the evergreen vaccinium, the huckleberries might be better in a pot. That's a possibility.
Okay, fantastic. And listeners, if you're listening to this and I did it, please write in. We'd love to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Just because we kill them doesn't mean you might have better luck. Yeah. One of our mottos we thought should be is we kill plants so you don't have to.
I love that.
Because we have so many used labels. I mean, it's plant amnesty really should come out here and take us away. So, there are I don't know if you want to hear about, there are some non-natives that also are very good for this time of year.
Absolutely. Give us. I was thinking rosemary. I've got rosemary right outside my window here. That's doing great.
Yeah, so that's a good example. And then also there's a shrub, a viburnum called bodentense, and a selection called pink dawn. And that blooms all winter long. It's fragrant, and the hummingbirds will go for it. Bees also will go for it, and it's very easy. It is get a little taller. It can get up to 10 feet or so, but very fragrant. Starts the end of October and blooms through. I mean, it's still blooming. It'll bloom through March.
Oh, isn't that delightful?
So that's a great thing to have if there's nothing else. I mean, that is hardy, and deer don't really like it. You can cut it back easily. So it's an easy plant. Obviously, you cut it back. I'm not sure if it would bloom. So it may bloom on old wood. So that you'd have to watch how much you do that. The other that is can be cut back in a very cold year is some of the grevilleas, and one in particular, grevillea, and they're from Australia, so you'd wonder how they could help our pollinators, but it's Grevillea victoria, and a variety we have is called Murray Valley Queen, and it has these orange spidery blooms all winter long. And the hummingbirds go for it. I think it's because in Australia they also have bird pollinators. They don't have hummingbirds, but they have other bird pollinators, and so, pollinators are often opportunistic, and so they will, some of them are more flexible than others, and see the hummingbirds seem to be very, very opportunistic. So those two are shrubs that will bloom through the winter, and that can be very helpful.
That it's really remarkable because the place where I live as well, there are some hummingbird feeders, but there's a number of plants, and you can just see them. They're just hanging on to them. They're not traveling very far, but they're just ready to sip nectar out of those flowers, and having them bloom there is just fantastic for them.
Yes, and so we don't have any hummingbird feeders, and yet when you go out into the garden around certain plants this time of year, you can hear them. You can hear the hummingbirds. I mean, you may not, you can hear them before you can see them necessarily, and that will only increase into the summer where we get lots of hummingbirds, and sometimes we'll even find a nest, which is very exciting.
Okay, well, let's move past this period. Let's move forward a few months. What are some of your plants that you kind of peak spring plants that you love?
Well, probably in the earlier to mid-spring, there's also a native plant called Darmera. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I don't know it.
Indian hellebore, I think, is a common name.
Yeah, okay.
Darmera peltata. And it blooms before the leaves come up. And it likes either shade, or if it's in the sun, it can be in full sun if it gets enough water. But it'll put up kind of a light pink bloom, and then we'll get these big leaves throughout the quite beautiful leaves throughout the rest of the season. So that is a native plant that usually grown in more kind of wetland areas, but it will take shade without being in, if it has some shade, doesn't want to be totally dry, but it doesn't need to be a wetland, that's for sure.
So this is distinct from most of the hellebores that we see popping up right now. This will be a native.
Oh yeah, that's a common name. It is really nothing to do with that. I mean, I should have said rhubarb. Did I said hellebore?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Indian rhubarb, I think, is actually the, sorry about that. And then there's the native Mahonias. There's repens, nervosa, and aquifolium. All three of those, they vary in their height, everything from just a ground cover to something that's more like almost 4 foot tall. And they will go through their periods of blooming throughout the spring. And another one I was looking through. I don't know if you're familiar with the native redbud, Cercis occidentalis.
I am. I love it.
Yes, that is a really heavy bloomer in like May. And that, unlike the eastern one, it is much more drought tolerant.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
So it likes to be in the sun. If you happen to be driving down the sort of Ashland area and Northern California in May, you'll see them on their hillsides, which just absolutely bake in the summer. And yet they're lush and blooming in May and very brilliant. So their blooms, I think, are actually heavier than the eastern varieties or the ones from Oklahoma or Texas.
Oh, fantastic.
And they do quite well here. And then there's the ceanothus. Many varieties of the ceanothus. They're going to be heavy bloomers, mostly in May. They're also very drought tolerant. And there are some varieties like Centennial or Repens that can be like ground cover. So these are some of the ceanothus, many of the native ones to the west, both from Oregon down into California, are evergreen. And Repens and Centennial are low growing. I mean, they can be just almost ground huggers. And then there are others like Blue Jeans that are much, or Victoria. Victoria can be quite big, 6 to 8 feet or more. And then Blue Jeans is more like maybe 5 feet or something like that. Anywhere from light to darker blue color. And they are just covered in bees in the spring.
They're such a great bee plant. And I guess, I was just referring to somebody the other day. Neil Bell had done over at Oregon Gardens the variety trial. And, it's just remarkable the sizes, the shapes of ceanothus that you can get. But I remember Neil mentioning the problem with winter kill. Some of them are a little bit more sensitive, I understand.
That is true. And so, that used to be something that would happen more common, and hopefully I won't be made a liar later this week, but, knock on wood or whatever, we have had some very mild winters. In fact, the last 2 winters, we would consider them zone 9 winters where we don't get below 20 degrees. And so that's one thing I wanted to bring up in our conversation was that, because what we've noticed is if we were to rely completely on native plants, that we would go through a period in mid to late summer where we wouldn't have much blooming. Because of the change in climate, a lot of our native plants are blooming earlier and they're done earlier. So the late summer can be kind of a desert in, as far as blooming plants that are only natives. If you don't include some plants from Southern Oregon or California, or even prairie plants. Prairie plants are great examples are great ones to use because they get their summer rainfall. They get summer rainfall, and so they're used to blooming throughout the summer, whereas a lot of our natives are adapted to drought and so go dormant in the later summer. So that can be challenging for a lot of. If you just rely on native plants, you may have trouble for the pollinators later.
That was a message that Al, in the last 2 episodes we've had Al Shea, he's really emphasized this, really thinking about that late summer period and filling in with some good water-wise, non-native plants that can keep that bloom going.
Right. And so there are plants both from other parts of the U.S. where there is more heat. And so that's one of the major things we found is the heat part, blooming while it's hot and not kind of pushing them to dormancy. Some of these plants that are from the plains, that's the central part of the U.S., will adapt to drought. You may have to get them established the first year. But for instance, Amsonia has been an excellent plant once established in a dry garden. After its first year, it'll bloom in the spring. It gets nice lavender or blue flowers. And then in the fall, they will turn golden. The foliage turns golden.
Oh, I'm just looking. It's a beautiful plant. What gorgeous flowers.
Yeah. And so they're native. Many of them are native to North America. So they definitely attract our native pollinators. Another is the baptisias, which are also native to North America. And once they're established, they are very long. We have found them to be quite long-lived and really easy plants to grow. And also, it's nice. We like to incorporate some legumes into the mix of plants so that we can encourage nitrogen fixing. And we want to grow a variety of species so that underground there is this interaction that occurs when you have diversity, where plants actually share resources to get nutrients from each other's. And there is evidence that they can also help with water, getting water, and some plants that are deeper rooted will also open up clay soils and help with the drainage, water drainage. So having a mixture of plants, I think it helps with also encouraging a wider a range of insects, so that you have less predatory problems with insects. When you're attracting a wide variety, I think it is a better balance. It doesn't mean you won't have any insect-related diseases, but I think it is minimized.
That's such a great point. And I remember Gail Ungalato sort of emphasizing this point of thinking about ecological function, a diversity of functions. And I love the way that you've described this. You have a plant that really fits the garden, the aesthetic later in the summer, gives you a nice shot of, beautiful blue flowers, but at the same time fixing nitrogen, conditioning the soil, and the whole suite, the whole design is not just aesthetic. It has this functional dimension.
Absolutely. So what we are integrating a lot of plants, some of them, a lot of natives, but other things from around the world, and see how they interact, see if they will adapt to our climate, and see if they are being visited by pollinators. So we're doing all those things. And, over time, we decide to edit some things out. Either they don't really adapt well, or they're not really thriving with that kind of treatment. So other things that we also like to incorporate bulbs, and many of them are more seasonal. They have that's why they are a bulb often, is because they are set up to have their show and then kind of go dormant and hold on to that energy for the future. And alliums are great ones to try, because generally they don't have a lot of predators that go after their bulbs. And they can be quite showy. So we've incorporated a wide variety, both selections that are hybrids, as well as even some of the native ones, such as Cernum, the nodding onion, which is a gorgeous onion in the garden and adapts well. It is not invasive. Or one from the Middle East, such as Christophii or Schubertii. Schubertii is quite interesting. It's sort of like the weed that kind of blows in the desert, then rolls. Anyway, it's like that in the Middle East, and it gets this giant, like 16 inch across inflorescence.
Really?
That is beautiful to dry through the season. It's almost like a fireworks blooming sometime in late May and in June. Very stunning, but only gets like 2 feet high, so it's not real tall. But it is amazing how like tumbleweed, that's the word I wanted to use. So the outer parts of it are interesting. The outer parts of the seed head don't really have much seeds. It's more the inner parts. The outer parts actually help to make it roll. So it doesn't really, we don't see it doing that here so much, but in the Middle East, sort of like Lebanon, Israel area, it exists. And there on the plains, it will, when it dries up, it starts rolling and then dropping seeds as it goes.
Isn't that cool?
But these are great to have. These seed heads are great. You can use them in your later, during the holidays or whatever, and spray paint them if you want, or just leaving them up in the garden. I think they're also beautiful as they age and turn kind of the straw color or silver colors. We don't necessarily, we're not really quick to begin to, deadhead things or take them out, because oftentimes the seeds of a lot of these plants are also important for birds or other insects. So sometimes the garden is not always tidied up right away.
And again, I think Al Shea was he was going on about really kind of emphasizing this point of leaving, not waiting until, after it gets warm enough for the first insects to fly to start to tidy things up, give the birds a chance to clean up those seeds and all the life that goes on with these stalks and stems. Well, I can imagine. So when you're thinking about where to put bulbs in a garden, I often see them just on a border or, somewhere visible. Is there any tricks to these bulbs? You were mentioning, for example, rodent damage. How do you get a good bulb establishment?
Well, most bulbs, it does vary, but alliums, for instance, they like to be in the sun, so being too shady is not going to work. There are some bulbs that will do okay in the shade, but you'll want to really check on that because most bulbs are going to want to be mostly sunny. And I would say most bulbs do not want to be overwatered in the winter either. Not the winter, the summer. The winter is not just a big deal, but many of these bulbs are adapted to Mediterranean-type climates. Mediterranean climates are very rich in bulbs. There are bulbs that come from other areas, but I would say the Mediterranean regions of the world are rich in bulbs, and they have adapted to summer drought, and so you want to take that into consideration. They can be mixed into borders, but they do not want to be constantly wet. So a slope is a good idea, or a place where that you don't water, you let it dry out in between watering. And so, I think there are many plants that will get away once they're established, and especially I think that if there's a mixture of plants and you mulch, you can get away with less water. And I think part of that is what happened, I think the plants do help each other with acquiring water, but also I think the mixture of plants helps, as I was talking about earlier, opening up the soil, and so you get better penetration of water into the soil, and then it holds on to it better. So I think that, sometimes we might be overwatering some areas of our garden, and so we just don't have that luxury. So our garden's too big to be watering a lot of it all the time. So a lot of our plants have to adapt to getting, intermittent water.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, let's take a break. I want to transition now into the summer. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Okay, we are back. At the break, there's a whole lot of plants we just didn't get into. In the spring. We've got such great plants. Tell us about some of the plants that we've missed in our first kind of pass of our spring bloomers.
So one of the natives that people aren't aware of that blooms in May and June is Sanguisorba, which is a burnet, Sanguisorba menziesii, and that gets to about 2 or 3 feet and has, I'd say, 2 to 3 inch long, almost like maroon caterpillars that dangle from these long stems. And I like them because they also have a certain movement. Any plants that bloom and have movement, sort of like grass does have movement, is wonderful to add to the garden because having something that moves with the wind really adds another dynamic, I think, to enjoyment in the garden.
I suppose so. And these are really a stunning color, and I can see they're on those thin stalks. I could just imagine them waving with just a little bit of wind. That must be really beautiful.
Oh, yeah. There's another one called lavender squirrel tail, and that even gets longer blooms, the dangle. Some of them are more upright, but those type have really long ones that are very interesting. Then we talked about the Sedalciae and the Cusickii is a really nice one because it's a darker. Some of them are kind of a pale pink. This is a really nice dark pink, deep pink. Butterflies and bees really like it, and it will bloom also in May. So, and then there's the penstemons, many of them from the mountains, and they will bloom. Some of them bloom in the spring, some will bloom spring to summer to fall. I mean, some of them are really very long blooming. So penstemons can vary, and some of them, if you cut them back a bit, will also just keep blooming.
And I think with those two plants, with Sedeltia and our penstemons, we find some of our oddest native bees on those plants. Those are real heavy hitters when it comes to sort of the more esoteric bees.
Right. That's right. Yeah. So there are some very rare. One thing I didn't bring up that is a great plant to incorporate in the garden is the Delphinium trillifolium. Many people don't know about that. That's more of almost a woodland, could be a shady meadow area. These delphiniums get up to, they have beautiful foliage, green rosettes that are very full in the spring, and then they put an inflorescence up with a blue and a white bee in the center, a white center.
Isn't it gorgeous?
And it is a gorgeous one. It gets up to about 4 feet. It is completely drought tolerant and then goes summer dormant. So you can have an area kind of a, woodland garden or with light shade, meadow garden, and it is completely carefree. Other than if you want to cut it back later, you can, but it is a beautiful, beautiful native.
Man, I really want one.
It's beautiful in mass. I mean, we have an area under an oak tree where there's like a 20 foot by 20 foot kind of or more mass of them that comes up every year, and it's I would say like April, May. It's stunning.
Wow. Okay. I'm
glad I thought of that when I forgot about it. But should we talk more about some of the summer ones, or
let's move to summer? And I know summer, it seems on the distant horizon at this point, but when we get into that drier, hotter part of the year, what are some plants that you recommend for pollinators?
So there's a fireweed. There used to be epilobium, but now they're Camomirian, I think is how it's pronounced. And this one is Flesheri, and it's a smaller one, so it doesn't get as big as what we think of when you see fireweed out in the woods blooming, late summer. This one starts blooming early summer, even maybe late spring, and it only gets maybe 2 to 3 feet tall.
Oh, really?
But it'll pretty much bloom all summer long, and it is completely drought tolerant. So it is, and hummingbirds and bees, maybe butterflies, I don't know. All of those will really go for it. And then there's Eriophyllum lantanum, which is our Oregon sunshine. And that has beautiful, it varies from what area you get it from. They can be somewhat green with a little silver frosting to the foliage, and the bright gold daisies that are held above it. Usually, if you want it to bloom all summer, you almost have to cut it back some, pretty hard, and then it will rejuvenate, get the foliage again, and then it'll rebloom. But some of them are very almost silver. The foliage can be quite silver. So it varies from that kind of green with silver specks to very silvery.
Oh, lovely.
Sun, and it's a low growing, with the blooms maybe a foot, something like that. It's pretty low and very drought tolerant. And then some things that echinops, some of the echinops, which are in the thistle family, but they have globe thistle as a common name, but they are really beloved by many. I mean, they'll just be covered in bees, also butterflies. Very disease resistant. They can be pretty drought tolerant. They're excellent addition.
I remember looking at a study from Europe looking at just absolute nectar production, and I remember echinops were amongst the highest. There's a reason why there's so many insects traipsing across those globes.
Yeah, and they add an interesting shape to the garden too. It's more architectural, very upright, and then that round bloom. And in the morning and evening light, they just glow, and they can be intensely blue. There's one called Oxford blue that we have but there's others that is really intensely blue. Another plant that's similar are the Eryngiums or sea hollies.
Oh, yeah. Another funny looking plant.
They can be funny looking plants, very structural also, excellent as a cut flower. They can be everything from intense blue. They can start out green, but then, kind of bleed. The blue just bleeds into them through the summer. Or they can be more silvery, starting out green,
Oh, really?
and then adding silver, kind of silver white, like Miss Wilmot's Ghost, which is Eryngium giganteum. And either one, they add a structure and architecture to the garden that also is interesting. That some of the plants are more sprawling and loose. These are kind of add some solid architecture, I think, to the garden as well.
I can totally see that.
They're always covered with, both of those are covered with pollinators. And then there's also the coreopsis, the tickweeds.
Mm-hmm.
They are often, they start kind of late, sometimes late spring, but more when we get some heat. And they really can keep blooming well into the late, almost into the fall. Many of them will just keep blooming. And they're very easy to grow. And then, let's see, there was, and then Anaphilus margaritaceae, which is the purling everlasting, our native pearly everlasting, with the white blooms. And that blooms in quite a while from the midsummer. And it becomes like almost it is like a pearly everlasting. It's something that it looks good, even into the winter. You can cut it back later if you want, but it has structure that stays in the garden. And then epilobiums, which they used to be Zauschneria, or they're related to fireweed. Many of them they can grow in Southern Oregon or into California, and they can be anywhere from just 6 to 8 inches tall up to maybe 2 to 3 feet. They generally have either very silvery, soft foliage or can have some green, but they will start blooming like July and then bloom through September with their most of their orangey red tubular flowers. Very good for hummingbirds, for bees.
Oh, I just pulled the picture up, and I always wondered what that was, and now I see them. Oh, that's what those are. I've seen them all around OSU. Al has planted them in a number of spots.
Oh, I'm sure Al Shea has taken great advantage of them because they're so easy. Huh. They really are easy, and they also fill in that late season. And they're drought tolerant, so there's a lot to like about them. And then there are some of the prairie plants that are good to consider are like the Vernonia. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Vernonia is ironweed. And so ironweed, there's several different selections of ironweed. Lettermanii is the iron butterfly, is another name for it. So definitely good for butterflies. Then there's also Murizenica, I think. But those are late blooming perennials, kind of similar to Joe Pye weed, but maybe not as big.
Okay.
And then Verbena bonariensis. Have you heard of that? Verbena bonariensis, Boner.
No, there it is. Yes, I see it.
That is great for bees or butterflies, especially. And it blooms a long time also, pretty much all summer, totally carefree. And it's like the bloom, the inflorescence are like held on very narrow stems. So it's almost like they're suspended in the air. You don't really hardly notice the structure of the plant because it's so very, pretty thin.
Oh, I see that.
But it holds itself up well. It doesn't fall. It doesn't collapse in the wind or anything. It's quite well. The structure is fairly significant. But it's great to, it just like these because it's held up higher, more like 4 to 5 feet. So it's more like eye level. And they're almost like they're floating above the garden. Very interesting effect.
Oh, I can see it. It looks like you've got these little purple because the stems are quite slender, and it looks like you're just kind of walking through these floating blooms.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
crazy. I love it.
So a couple other native things that, many of us, when we think of our native spirea, we think of Spirea douglasii, which is is fairly big shrub. And it may be a little too big for many gardens. And so other options could be a Spirea bechifolia, which comes from the Cascades, and it's lower, maybe only 3 feet tall, and very drought tolerant and sun tolerant. And it has more the kind of the flatter blooms that butterflies often go for. And it pretty much blooms most of the summer. And then in the fall, it has beautiful reds and oranges and purples. So I think it's a great drought tolerant. It can get some water, but it doesn't need it.
And they bloom a long time. The ones on campus are really, they're bloom for months.
And then another native is Spirea densiflora. And it's a little bigger and has more of a pink bloom. Not as long as douglasii, sort of in between the two. And it also gets nice fall color. And it seems to be pretty long blooming as well.
Fantastic.
So those are they may be more manageable for our gardens. Just like Holodiscus, the ocean spray can become quite a large shrub. We're trying to introduce some smaller ones that come from Southern Oregon, maybe the mountain or the Rockies, that maybe only get 3 or 4 feet, that might work out better.
That would be great. It is such a, it really does hum with bees, but the ones that I've seen in gardens are huge. They are so tall and so big.
Yeah, so many people may not want to take up that much space in their garden. And so having something smaller so that it has room for other things, that may work out better for many people. And then another plant we really love is the verbascum bombiciferum polar summer, or Arctic summer. And that is a stunning vertical plant. Its foliage can last all through the winter. It's very powdery, silver colored.
Oh, I see it.
Very soft. And then it puts up an inflorescence that eventually can get up to like 8 feet. And it blooms all summer with these soft yellow blooms, constantly covered by bees.
And the foliage it is really white. It is really gorgeous.
Yes. Yeah, you can imagine that contrasting with that verbena is also very interesting. But that it adds so you have, if a lot of the summer flowers are going to be in the hot colors, the reds, the yellows, maybe purples. And then you add that silver colors in a nice contrast, kind of a cooling color. So that cooling, upright, and it's kind of playful too, because as it gets even bigger, it begins to have some movement in the afternoon breezes we often get. And it's nice to add some vertical to the garden so that it's not all kind of rolling mounds on the ground.
Absolutely.
Having something that's up at eye level is I think adds interest. And plus the verbascum also have these deep roots. And I think they're another example of something that opens up the ground and I think helps drainage and break up the soil as well.
Yeah, I can just imagine having those tall spikes in the middle of, it must be, awesome. Great. These are awesome.
Good ideas.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear about more in that time, or do you want to move on to other?
I'd love to hear more. If you've got 2 more heavy hitters, let's do that, and then we'll move into the next season.
So something for later summer is salvia from Texas areas, and so it can take the heat. Salvia repens. It says it's called repens, but there is an upright form, and this one is called blue willow, and it has arching stems, gets up to 3 to 4 feet, and then they create almost like a fountain of blue blooms.
Oh, wow, I can see it.
And the bees and hummingbirds love it. So, and it has movement with it. So there's a lot. We have it along a path going up to the pavilion in our garden. And in the late summer, it is just gorgeous, lining the path, seeing the insects going for it, and then the movement. It adds a lot of interest that time of year.
Oh, that is a beautiful plant. Oh, that's great. I haven't seen it before, so this is wonderful.
And then the group of plants that are called mountain asters or oringerons. They are great. They bloom all summer and into the fall. Sometimes they need to be cut back, but they, for if you don't have a lot of room and you want something that's going to give a long season of interest, oringerons or mountain asters are a good thing. And certainly there are a lot of pollinators like the bees and butterflies tend to go for them. Not really so much for the hummingbirds, but bees and butterflies, excellent.
Well, that's a great transition because, a lot of our asters are, going right into the fall. What do we have, for fall and maybe a little bit into winter?
So asters are certainly good. There's the eastern asters, and then there's a group of asters, Astrolaterifolius or ericifolius, and they have lots of little blooms. So there's one called Prince, which has very dark foliage and in kind of light pink or almost white blooms. And then there's one called Snow Flurry that just covers the ground. It's just like a ground cover.
Oh, my goodness.
Solid white. And it's actually interesting because, another time that I've enjoyed walking in the garden is when the moon is towards, getting full or almost, is full or almost full, because things like this, the snow flurry will it just pops. That white color will just glow. So definitely, if you have plants that have white blooms or white foliage or variegated, those are really fun in the moon garden. You should go out in your garden that time of year. That in the evening like that. The best time I think is late summer or fall because it's not so late when the moon comes up. It gets darker a little earlier, so that's a time to really enjoy that. And there are a lot of things that bloom at night that you don't, are fragrant at night that you don't smell during the day too.
I'm looking at some images of snow flurry, and it almost looks, in some cases, almost like a ground cover. Yeah, during the rest of the year, it does lose its foliage in the winter, but it is during the summer it is a green ground cover. Wow.
And then it is a mass of flowers in the fall.
It sure is. It's you can't see the foliage anymore.
Right, exactly. It's completely covered in white. It's amazing.
That's awesome. I love it.
And so also the solidagos, the goldenrods. So Canadensis is our native one, and it can be a little invasive, and you have to kind of place it and have a good placement for it because it can take over. But it is very important for our native pollinators. So if you have a place where you're not necessarily watering a lot, or it's kind of in a hell strip or something like that, you could consider that. But there are other selections of solidago that. Like we have one called Fireworks that is very upright, does not spread, gets about 3 to 4 feet tall, and has kind of more horizontal blooms.
Oh, it's crazy looking.
And that one really gets a lot of pollinators and is quite striking. We have an example of it with the plume poppy. I don't know if you've heard of plume poppy.
No.
But it has that has very glaucous foliage with kind of a plum-colored, unpoppy-like looking bloom. It's more like it's like a plume rather than like we think of the petals of most poppies. But that combination of those two together is stunning.
I'm seeing one picture here against some purple asters, and that's a great color combination.
Yes, that is the asters and the goldenrods are a great combination. Absolutely.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you say this because I know lots of people are nervous about Solidago. They think it's just going to be a monster. It's going to take over, and these look great.
No, there are many. We have many selections of Solidago that have been well behaved, and we have grown them in the garden, and that's how we know. We've seen them over the years, and I can tell you that Canadensis, yes, given the right situation, it can be aggressive, but there are many varieties that I think it's Solidago rugosa is the particular species for fireworks. So that one is really excellent, but there are many others as well.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. It is such a great pollinator plant late in the season. It just really does attract a lot of, and I also see like little parasitic wasps and other really great, it's an easy flower for a small insect to get into.
Yes. Now we already mentioned the Vernonias, and they are going to be late blooming perennials. So that's good. And many, the penstemons, some of the penstemons just keep going into the fall. So that, and also Agastache or Agastache, however you want to pronounce it, the mint bush. Those, I've noticed some of those varieties will go well into the fall. And they are, I don't know if they have edible flowers. You can taste them. They have a very kind of minty sweet taste, and they also can be used to make or be put into a tea to add flavor as well.
Well, it stands to reason. That's great.
Yeah, next time if make sure that it is a Agastache, but those you can definitely safely eat any of their flowers, and they're like a breath mint.
Oh, great!
So I think that's a very good option that is more than just the fall. It really goes all the way through. Helianthus also, some of those Helianthus can be good for both the summer and into the fall as well. They can go, kind of earlier fall. Later fall, there are some non-natives, for instance, Arbutus unido, the strawberry bush. And there's there's one selection we have that is called Oktoberfest that starts blooming late October and into the early winter and has a darker pink bloom and doesn't get that big, maybe 5 to 6 feet rather than a big tree.
Oh, really? Huh.
An evergreen shrub, and then the following year, they will also get the strawberry-like fruit that's very interesting. So that is something that, and also that time of year we can, in the fall, late fall, the Mahonia times media, like Charity, will start blooming. So that one, it can get up to like 8 to 10 feet tall and have these candelabra-like upright yellow blooms that are both fragrant and great for pollinators, especially since there isn't a lot else happening that time of year.
That is fantastic. I think that brings us all the way over to the where we started, practically.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's so many plants. One of the plants I forgot to mention earlier was the Monardas.
Oh yeah.
And there is a group of there are the fistulosas, which are the native ones, but any of the Monardas are going to be great for butterflies, especially. Those are a great one to introduce.
Well, this is fantastic. And I guess coming the whole year round, one of the things many of us are excited about midway through this bloom season is the Pollinator Festival on National Pollinator Week at Dancing Oaks. Now, last year I imagine it was canceled. And
yes.
Yeah, that was because I got a notification from you. Tell us first of all, let's just, for people who don't know, what it's been going on for a number of years now, and there's vendors from all sorts of community groups there with doing pollinator education. Tell us a little bit about the event and what's in store for the future?
Well, we don't, at the moment, because of the way the rules are and everything, we haven't planned on it because it may not be allowed. And so we hate to get our, the groups together that, to do it and not be able to do it. But it is a celebration and educational opportunity, celebrating the pollinators and having some education. Also activities for kids, and these are some practical things like we've made small nests for mason bees, have given people the materials and where they can actually make them and show them how to make them using natural materials such as teasel and bamboo to make them. And also have activities for kids like where they'll have these balls they can throw it, try to pollinate the flowers, and they can stick to flowers, things like that, or pictures where they can take pictures with through these. We have
like put your head through.
Where there's a place for your head to go, and then there's a flower around it, and so kids can take pictures of that. But let's see, I had some information about we would have combinations. We'd sell pollinator friendly plants as a group or individually and have specials on those. And then we also had many different groups that could provide education about certain things like the Audubon Society, Benton Soil and Water District, the Corvallis Environmental Center, Marion Master Gardeners, Oregon Bee Project, Oregon Flora, Oregon State Master Gardeners, Xerces Society. And then there was also local providers of both, like there was a cider company that came, and then we had some vendors selling food as well. And then there was music throughout the event. It's a one-day event, and we really encourage families with kids or anybody to come. And then we did tours through the garden where we would focus on pollinating plants and give people ideas about what they could do and answer questions.
Well, 2022, I'm looking forward to it. I got it on my calendar.
Good. Yes, I think that we'll see what activities we can get away with this summer. We might have to do smaller things. The rules have been such that encouraging larger gatherings like that have not either been completely illegal or greatly restricted. So we'll have to play it by ear and see what kind of things we're able to do.
Well, I'm looking forward to, as all of us, to things resuming, but I am so glad that we have such wonderful plants in our gardens to keep us company as we, I'll be really cheered up as we come out of winter, and some of these plants are going to start to bloom as I go on my walks. It's going to be wonderful.
Yes, it is very exciting, and today was a great example of that already.
Well, thank you so much, Fred. Good luck with your season, and thanks for taking time to talk with us today on pollination.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for talking to me. I look forward to seeing people out in the garden soon.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.